Hello, welcome everyone to Vocation Mode, the podcast from Vocare Union. I'm Megan, and today I have the privilege of sitting down with co-founders Ben Johnson and Troy McKnight. This episode is all about stories, how Vocare Union began, why we stepped into the space, and kind of what we hope to offer to leaders and organizations through the work that we do every single day. So I figured this would be a good chance to kind of sit at the table and get to hear sort of the heart behind Vocare Union. And we'll kind of dive into that, I guess. Ben, hello.
Hello. What's perfect is if we're going to be talking about LinkedIn later. Benjamin Johnson is my LinkedIn slash SEO name. And Troy would know a more famous Ben Johnson, but I had to find my own space. So Benjamin is a key point I know when people don't know me versus when they use Ben. And no one should use Benny except for my family.
Wow.
Did you want to just elaborate on your name twin briefly for
Yeah.
those that aren't aware?
Troy, like you know it better than me.
Yeah, because I'm old. But yes, the what we would call the momentary fastest man in the world, Mr. Ben Johnson, who at the Olympics blew by the Olympic record for Canada, and we all danced and celebrated for a moment until afterwards it was discovered that he had some synthetic help that allowed him to hit that speed. And so he is the famous, infamous Ben Johnson. This is simply the famous Benjamin Johnson, and we're excited that he's here with us today. So,
I guess we should just sort of start at the beginning. Do you guys want to share a little bit about your unique backgrounds? I know, Troy, you've just very briefly glossed over it in a couple episodes, but haven't really, gone that deep. And Ben, you've been all over the map. You've got 18,000 companies, so I don't know how you're going to distill it down to, a couple minutes of your time. But Troy, why don't you, we'll start with you.
sure. I was fortunate enough to spend close to 2 decades in the what I would call the faith-based not-for-profit space, and those 2 decades took me through different spaces across Kentucky, New York, back to Canada, New Zealand, and then back to Canada again. So I've had the opportunity of experience leading in not-for-profits really internationally, and then more lately working in the development space for the last almost 7 years. And so made that shift from faith-based not-for-profit to development. And that's been a fascinating shift for me as well, where I learned about a whole bunch of transferable skills that I didn't know I had, and really had the joy of seeing impact in that space as well. So it's been a great journey for me. And along the way, had the opportunity to be involved with a lot of hiring, a lot of team building, management, coaching of teams along the way as well, which is what kind of I think has led us into this space that that we find ourselves in. Started asking myself when I looked at some of the challenges that not only organizations, but individuals who were hired by organizations were facing. I just began to wonder along the way, could there be something better? Could there be a different way, a better way to actually make sure that the right people find the right spaces, but that they are actually cared for, coached, and nurtured while they're there? So that's a little bit about me and some of my thinking that's kind of brought us to this space.
Well, I've managed to journey along with both of you over parts of the last decade. My entry into the charity world began at Union Gospel Mission, which might be a bit of a foreshadow for some of our conversation. But I went from being a young digital marketer to getting a job there to then way before the pandemic moving. So that meant the end of my job, back before you could work with just a laptop. But funny enough, it actually turned into a contracting gig with a laptop. And those of you know my agency days, and so 15 years of almost 15 years ago, starting that, and growing a team and working with very purpose-driven organizations to grow their revenue. What changed in my life a couple years ago, as we both know really well, was kind of ending that and exiting the agency. And I spent summer reflecting on what next, because it was basically 2008 was the last time I had a similar thought. And then, how 20 years can go by, right? And so I was like, "Oh, I should be pretty intentional about this next decision." And it was also my kids were at an age where I felt like I could take a break and kind of have one last great summer essentially, because then all of a sudden they're going after university and you're begging for time with them.
Yes, I
uh,
know that very well. Yes.
yeah, yeah. So it was this like little space and time to reflect what next, and I came up with two things that I've used as coach and co-create. And there was as you mentioned, Megan, a flurry of business ideas, but I basically had to find people to partner with them to make it happen. And the singular thing that I like to think is like coaching leaders and building teams. And love ideas, but those have no value and no meaning until you can kind of have them be embodied by other people.
Yeah, yeah, well said. What's the saying? Idea is worth $0. Although now, I mean, AI can help you turn most ideas into actual things.
At the same time, like the as much as it can lead you, you still need to take action. It's amazing that like we all of us have started to make greater and greater use of AI, but it's still a coach and advisor, and agent mode is taking off, but you still need to learn with it.
Yeah, yeah, no, like part of your two-pronged strategy to life here and career happiness is coaching. Do you feel like that's in jeopardy, I guess, with AI coming up, or are you feeling like that connection to real persons?
Yeah, at first, I think any mediocre version of anything is going away. And so if it was sort of basic, and like even sometimes having deep research and other things reflect back to people some stuff is incredibly insightful. But I think a lot of the sort of companion connection, like care space, like that's sort of the latest to go. And if anything, it would be like in most like dystopian futures, it's a flex to use real people or to flex to go like analog, right? Like I would rather have a personal trainer if I could than a free digital app kind of thing, because that companionship or that reflecting back coming alongside, it's not comparable yet, at least. Nor do we really want it to be.
How did you guys get to know each other? What brought you together here?
The stars aligned. As I said earlier on the introduction, I made my way kind of out of the faith-based church world into the development world, and was fortunate enough to be hired at Kelowna's Gospel Mission doing major gifts and corporate partnerships. And Ben, at the time, his business continued to provide marketing support for the organization. And I met him very early on in my tenure there, and immediately saw in him someone who not only brought expertise, but who was really about growth, about helping people grow, helping people succeed. And certainly for me, starting brand new, having him alongside was huge as I kind of started to make my foray into a brand new space. And so over those years, Ben and I became good friends and started dreaming at one point about like, well, what would it look like one day? If we could do something together, would I be open to it? Because as you can tell by the gray in my beard, I'm a little older than the other folks on this podcast. Would I be open to it? Would I be excited about that? And I said, yeah. And so we just started riffing ideas about what could be and looked for spaces within the not-for-profit world where we thought we could actually make a difference and have an impact. So,
Ben, was there a moment for you where the idea came to reality and you decided to sort of, yeah, bring this thought child into the world?
Absolutely. Well, I know when you're running a fundraising or marketing agency, you meet a ton of people. Many people are fixed in their thinking. So if we ever talk about a growth mindset and even just like not necessarily abundance versus scarcity, but like that, what does it mean to listen versus hear? And when we were paired up with different strategists, Alex Koloff and I got to meet Troy, and it was like instantly we followed up with this one Zoom call, and we're like, wow, these active listening skills are unreal. And I was like, I don't even think I understood what I was saying as much as he reflected it back. And it was just like, oh, this is wild. One thing that happened as relates to this like recruitment industry was we had somehow got brought up that one of the leading ones in the space absolutely passed him up again and again and again. And I was just like, it was so fascinating to me how he was not the ideal candidate or not someone who the filters were screaming, hey, this is someone we've got a live one, we've got amazing talent before us. And so I actually went to that agency and I was like, hey, I'm curious, like, why didn't you gonna rate Troy highly? And they're like, oh, no, let's go meet him. Oh yeah, he's amazing. He's unbelievable, total rock star. I was like, oh yeah, that's what I thought. Nothing since. Here's yet another data point of there's a certain group of people at the very least that are being utterly ignored. And if it's people like Troy, like yet another thing that needs to change in this industry. And like I hope we get to like talk about that. But it's fascinating that Troy was sort of patient zero for me. There's a certain type of leader that's being absolutely ignored from a scouting perspective or from a recruiting finding perspective. Like I think some top candidates are all known and kind of get move around from top to top, but I think any recruitment agency should also be finding or searching for talent, right? And taking a little bit of a risk there, and it just blew my mind that Troy, even after I brought them up again, was still not the key person or not the mold that they were looking for. And then it was also a realization that a lot of these agencies have a type, a mold, a safe pick.
Yeah, that's so funny because I know, Troy, you had been speaking about a similar situation going on right now with a friend of yours, right? That's sort of in the industry and she's sort of been overlooked again and again too. Do you want to speak to what some of those qualities are that you think they're looking for, or maybe that mold in general? Why is it so rigid? What makes it that way? Why are recruitment agencies sort of hiring the way that they are, do you think?
It's not just them that would perpetuate an issue, of course, the whole industry. And it's not just the nonprofit world, of course. But I think something that Troy and I've said a few times is very rarely is it looking for knowledge, skills, and abilities that are relevant or lateral transferable skills or even character alignment with core values and culture. And so those things are becoming way more important now because skills themselves, like we talked about earlier, in an AI land aren't what they used to be. And so even going back to what I said about like Troy's active listening, or that Troy wasn't 24 and getting into the job, there was like, wait, there might be something more here that he's learned and developed over these times, and then he's managed to laterally move into this space. And the particular one that he was in was major giving, where you need to sit down and have these conversations, often in an uncomfortable space like money, and talk about something also kind of um difficult to fully like explain or walk through. And so if you're used to really difficult concepts like faith or the difficult conversations that come with being a pastor and any social caretaker, and so like what should I do with my life kind of questions, or like being able to ask good questions was such a like it was a great lateral skill that he transferred into those careers. And I think recruiters aren't incentivized to spend more than a few minutes or more than a checklist to really kind of have that depth of conversation.
Yeah, I guess I would add too that I think the safety net that Ben talked about, right? Like if we only pick certain kinds of people and then we build a stable of certain kinds of people, then it's pretty safe for us to move those pieces around the board from organization to organization, which we also noted seems to happen quite a bit, right? So it does seem like a lot of shuffling around kind of known commodities and specific skill sets or specific molds. And then what that does is you're missing out on people who we believe have the skills, the passion, the experience, some of the skills, transferable skills, to come into the space to actually elevate the work that's happening, to broaden the conversation and to deepen the impact that these organizations are having. But they never get through the door because, as Ben said, they don't meet the criteria on the short checklist, and they're not part of the system that already kind of the ecosystem. It's about the efficiency, right? Like it's pretty efficient if you have a mold that you're looking at and you have only a certain type of person that you're looking for. It's pretty efficient to be moving those people around quickly and getting them in seats and moving on and making it through your money back period, and then you're off to the races to the next person. It's a bit more time consuming to actually enter into a relationship with people, to broaden the search out, to start talking to people who maybe are an outlier by what maybe the organization is looking for, but you see the potential and you can bring them in, you can advocate on their behalf. But we actually believe people are worth that because these are people who are called to these vocations. 100%. I mean, when you look at many of the models that are out there right now, they are transactional, and really the goal is to put a person in a seat. The goal is this seat is empty. We're going to find a person. We're going to put them in the seat. They're going to hopefully have, some of the skills and whatnot that the organization needs. But really the focus is let's get them in the seat so that the seat is filled. The organization can kind of keep on trucking. They don't have to be paused at all. And then our role then is to then move on and find the next person to put into the next seat. And that can just be a bit transactional, right? And people just become a commodity, and we forget about the fact that these are real people with real experiences and real skills and real stories who feel, particularly in the not-for-profit space, most people aren't kind of connecting there because they're looking to get rich. It's not a Fortune 500 company, right? So they're there also because there is some sort of calling, which again, we've talked about a lot on the show. Vocare is Latin for to call or calling. There's a calling into this space, and we want to honor that by actually getting to know the individuals, really doing a deep dive on who are these people, why do they feel called to this space, what do they bring, what skills do they have that maybe would get missed on a short checklist or a quick kind of filter. And then let's actually try to introduce them into the space, into these places where we think they can not only make an impact in the short term, but that they can actually bring some longevity to the service, and they can actually build long-lasting, high-impact teams, which we think will actually help reduce churning and help the organizations that are actually really changing our communities and our worlds.
When we kind of say the simple, efficient, safe, the downside of what I noticed was the emphasis was put right at the end instead of right at the beginning of a conversation. And so that was one change that we made. It was like, hey, we're going to have these Vocare convos with people and maybe dig a little bit deeper on the front end than others would have. Particularly, the default is maybe the lowest paid employee at a recruitment agency is doing all the initial interviews. We want to be most efficient on that front end. But if that's meeting someone, that's sort of a misplay on the opportunity to go, what is their vocation? Where are they going? Of course, this could be the wrong fit, but if I'm going to know this person for 30 years or even just 15, there is so much utility to going a little bit deeper now, because it could be, hey, I want to let you know right away this job isn't a great fit, but let's keep in touch and let's keep going. What otherwise happens is a quick filtering out of people who don't hit the safe, and then we're presented with the final 4 and 5 that are very familiar. And a lot of charities just they do crave the safest choice. And that's kind of where our model, from a financial standpoint, I wanted it to be different, because it was like, hey, if you want the safest thing and I want you to be happy and I want a decision to be done, great, let's go with the safest choice. If I am incentivized for the right fit to be there for some time, maybe the safest choice is we ask actually a few more questions, both of the organization and the candidate, to make sure it's a great fit. Because it's like, hey, you tell me the revenue needs to double in 2 years. Hold on, let's have that conversation, because, or like, let's learn a little bit more about the financial situation where you're at. And I want to have a conversation with the leading candidates to see if this is something that they want to wrestle with. Because like Vocare, or like your vocation doesn't necessarily mean to be a higher calling. It's just like, I would like to move forward with purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, hey, this is the mission at hand. Is this something, without sharing maybe all the details, that you feel like you're going to meet the moment? What tends to happen instead is that they're thrust into a situation that they're not even at all prepped for. And so the odds of them sticking around and leading to burnout, perpetuating this like 18-month tenure for a lot of charitable leaders.
Yeah, they do tend to just to churn, and so part of the goal is to actually stop the churn. And again, one of our core values, when you dig into our website a little bit is, is tell the truth. And it seems like a silly core value, but that's exactly what Ben's talking about, right? Is spending a little bit more time on the front end with the organization to really understand who they are, what's their culture, like how do you actually interact together as a team? What does your most valuable employee look like to be sure that we're getting the right fit for the organization to begin with, but also to really know where are you actually at? Because so often we see, I mean, I've just met with someone last week who is a newer ED in an organization, and they have run into all kinds of challenges that were not mentioned at all in the hiring process. And they find themselves really having to make much bigger, much more challenging decisions than they would ever thought they would need to be making in their early tenure. And I just think how different it would have been if they could have known the lay of the land a little more clearly. I believe this individual would have absolutely still taken the role, but they would have attacked it differently. They would have set different priorities in those early days, which I think would have been better for the organization and certainly better for the individual who's finding it incredibly stressful as they're kind of navigating a whole bunch of challenges that they didn't know existed. And so for us, we want to try to provide a clearer, more open, honest line of communication so people know what they're choosing. And again, we believe they'll be excited to choose it. The right person won't be scared off by the challenges that exist. The right person will embrace those. We're simply allowing them to come in ready and able and focused to take those challenges on as they begin.
I think that's a really nice segue into another question I had here, which was related to those gaps. Do you feel like you could sort of elaborate on the types of challenges that new leaders find themselves in? And do you feel like it's sort of intentionally withheld so that organizations are putting their best selves forward? It's setting a good impression, it's trying to lure people in, yeah? Or do you feel like there's some things they just overlook?
I think I do take the stance that the industry falls into the stance of being predatory in the same way that the default within in the realtor world is the yeah, hey, this is a start, fixer upper. How do I? It's great curb appeal. How do I use it's cozy, that sort of language to frame it in the most ideal way possible. Is it's a scarcity mindset of going like, hey, if I can just frame this in a certain way and get them in, they'll figure it out from there, and they've made the decision. And so it's the same way we've learned that pushing a child into the lake to teach them to swim is absolutely from a kind of neuro standpoint the worst thing that you can do, because you're activating the wrong part of their brain, and that's not teaching any skills. And but like the more important thing is, I think the issue for leaders in the nonprofit space isn't simply that they're compensated less. And kind of my MO around the 4-day work week is that is usually paying people a little bit less for a 32-hour or 30-hour work week. But what's unfortunate in the nonprofit world is you might be compensated a little bit less. You might be focused on something more meaningful, but none of your gaps likely get acknowledged or relieved. It's a painful opposite, which is like we need you to wear every hat, and we won't acknowledge that those are gaps. And so I think that's where, specifically for that either onboarding or kind of the choice of a top candidate, acknowledging even the candidate's gaps and saying, hey, uh, w- total compensation or the plan for the year or 2 years ahead, how might this be addressed? At the very least, acknowledged.
Wouldn't it be fair to say, though, I think there's a lot of nonprofits where capacity is such a constraint that we're just not aware of what everyone's doing. So they could be wearing a lot of hats, and other people could be completely unaware of the hats that they're wearing. And this could be a sort of a blind gap that we're not aware of until someone steps into that role, right?
And so one theory we had when we're recruiting for board members is like vocational diversity. Wouldn't it be so great if we had someone who has this background, and oh, we want a really successful entrepreneur? But the thing that almost all boards lack is context for what is going on within the organization they're overseeing. And that's not for them to step out of a governance. But what happens in Silicon Valley is the CEO for Google is likely to be a board member for maybe not the most competitive version of themselves, or like Facebook, but it's like they could be on LinkedIn. And so that having board members who have relevant governance oversight is just something that the charity world has almost completely refused to do. And so, yeah, you have leadership that is right above them, that has no idea what it's like to be in their shoes.
I love what Ben's saying there though too, and I do think that some of the challenges that EDs and CEOs who get hired for not for profits do face is the fact that often the people who are overseeing them, the people they're reporting to, just they don't have sector experience at all, like not one of them, and so therefore it's so challenging for them to feel like they can actually come to the board and find kind of relief and support and insight and wisdom around those specific challenges. And they are left to feel a little bit like, well, it's the whole sink or swim thing that Ben talked about, right? I've been pushed off the raft, like, I better start swimming like crazy or else I'm not gonna make it. And so I do think that adds a lot to the complexity. I was thinking just back to like even the beginning, like where you were like, do they know that there's issues? They don't talk about it. I think sometimes they do, but I also think just what Ben's touched on is if the board doesn't have sector experience and if the board is not actually engaged in understanding what is going on in the work, I do think sometimes they can have huge blind spots about like what some of the challenges are. And if those are not communicated clearly upward by the person who is leading in that space, I think often that feedback loop gets broken. And sometimes boards are pretty ignorant of what actually is going on in the organization. And so they are unable to disclose really clearly about what the big challenges are. But far too often, I do think people wander into those spaces or get placed. Wander in is not the right word. Get placed into those spaces where, they're told, we're all good. Yeah, no, man, we meet every month and we read the reports and everything's amazing. And it's not. And people get T-boned as they kind of start their new role. And it can be incredibly devastating. And it begins to break down trust, I think, from the very beginning. I think it's very difficult when you've asked questions and you've been told everything's great. And then within 2 weeks, you realize everything's not great. It's really hard then to go back to the board, right? And to be able to have conversations and trust that like, well, I mean, it just creeps in. Did they know and not tell me, or did they just not know? And if they didn't know, well, that's a whole other set of challenges that we now have to navigate as I'm just starting to settle in and learn and lead. So
I know Vocare offers a lot of services that kind of build on that, right? So you'll meet with the candidate that's been chosen for the first 40 days, and you'll kind of offer the coaching that you talked about earlier, Troy, and we've talked about this on previous episodes and some of the things that you sort of offer that make Vocare Union unique in the recruitment space. Do you feel like that is sort of your ICP, your ideal client?
as we've been launching our business, right, as the company, is because we just recognize that far too often onboarding is pretty woeful. And so we recognize just the importance that when someone starts, we really want them to start well so that they can finish well. So we get to come alongside and actually be that kind of third party in there who advocates on behalf of the candidate, but we're also advocating to make sure that the organization has what it needs so that they can thrive together.
So what happens if you have like these quarterly meetings, or you're meeting, more regularly for the first 40 days and it's just like everything's great, no notes? What do you do?
I've yet to experience that, but if I find that wonderkin, which I can't imagine, I think there's always growing edges. And even just, with the experience that I just finished up a first 40, and the individual is incredibly competent, but they were also very alone. Early on, like I think our second meeting, the comment was, "I am so glad you're here." And so it wasn't just about filling gaps, it was being a coach. During those first 40 days, it was being a safe place to bounce ideas off, begin developing the operational plan, work on the 90-day plan with an individual who has some outside wisdom and insight. And so it's not always just about big gaps or issues that need to be solved, but it's also just about providing the support and the coaching to help somebody start really, really well.
I know, Ben, when you and I worked together for a while, we had this period of time where everyone was hired in pairs, sort of the bonded pairs. Is that sort of, snowballing off that same philosophy?
My first memory of that happening was when I actually did that, gave a tour in my elementary school to a new kid. That kind of aloneness that you're presented with. And it's like, how do you bond with a board member is quite tough. If you're in a situation where it's like, say it's like you're two quarters in, and it's like both sides are going, this is outstanding. How do we make the most of this moment? If we have a candidate who's a 10 out of 10 to us and say, hey, you have an unbelievable opportunity here. That person might be capable of a little bit more or want to do a little bit more. What if you offered that first? Because I think there is a tragedy that comes with those where that gets taken for granted. Oh, that person was a total all-star. And then all of a sudden that can turn. We're going like, hey, you always took me for granted. Or someone else approached them and gave them an opportunity they couldn't refuse. And so I think if you have this like accelerating situation where like this is going incredibly well, going, hey, like have we tested the limits of this then?
I know we touched on it just earlier, but Ben, I'm curious, what do you think your ideal client looks like?
Yeah, I'm curious about that one because our model is so different. I think we have an opportunity to help a lot of organizations that have never had a recruiter help them. And the other one is we mentioned AI before, and HR is one of those service areas that I think we said like if you're not great at it, it's coming for you. I do think a lot of HR departments haven't been structured well and haven't really served a lot of value. And they're expensive. If you're paying 60, 80, 150,000 a year for HR for an organization that might have 50 to 500 people, I think they can find themselves in a troublesome position in that they're not spending their time recruiting for one. It's interesting in that I'm describing two very different organizations. One is we're so small, like how could we ever hire a recruiter? And then on the other end is larger organizations that have a lot of hiring needs might be realizing that their HR department is an AI bot that fills in forms, or that it's a great process and not a whole bunch of people. But then they go, well, who meets all the people who could be our ideal candidate and is a matchmaker for us? So I think actually the value shifts over to recruiters quite a bit. And so we probably have two ideal segments in that way.
So are you out to get the HR departments at organizations, or do you see them fulfilling a different need?
A lot of people need to fulfill a different need than has been in the past.
Mm.
And HR is a funny one because like it tends to not be that enjoyed by employees, and that's unfortunate because if you're representing people and culture, you should one be the embodiment of it. Maybe that would be like, hey, like how do I make sure I'm retaining and maximizing the utilization of people within this organization? I'm the chief advocate for them getting paid more, not establishing pay bands and stifling them. So like if bureaucracy is their main operation and value, like that is unfortunately a skill that is being taken away. And so whether you're internally recruiting or externally, that's again one of the things that I think makes Vocare Union different than other recruitment is our focus is on high performing teams and retaining them. And so in that way, we're actually non-competitive or we are competitive to HR in the sense that we're aligned to the exact same thing that they should be.
It's funny, when you said that, I kind of realized that I haven't seen HR come up in a job role in a while. It's always been like the people and culture lead or the culture leader. And if I looked at a job title and it said HR, I would be completely disinterested. But I've seen a couple that are like people and culture, and I'm like, ah, yeah, I could set up like something a little bit fun and jazzy for this organization. So I do think that maybe the industry is starting to adapt, or kind of see what you're outlining a little bit, Troy. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, I just think to Ben's point too, that unfortunately over time it has often operated, like Ben said, as kind of like this. It's somewhat ineffective. It's about forms, about SOPs, it's about maintenance, right? I think the other side that I've seen in a couple orgs that I've been involved in too is that very quickly the people and culture HR department, they can become quite bogged down, and really they don't have the bandwidth to either search out, and sometimes they don't really have the bandwidth to actually build high impact teams either, because they spend the majority of their time dealing with like basically bad behavior within the organization, and that can end up taking up so much time because of all of the laws and the processes that are in place there. And so I do think there is also people within that space who work in HR and people in culture who feel really called to build a better space, but their job unfortunately has become so much of what they dislike, that they really can benefit from having somebody come alongside and say, let us be your eyes and ears out here. Let us bring in the kind of people that we believe will align with your culture and then help you grow. And actually, by doing so, we're going to actually make your job better as the people and culture professional, because the people we bring in are not going to require as much discipline and work as you're currently putting in to the people who've been brought in before. So I do think there's an opportunity for us to be a real ally to a people and culture and HR staff, because we can actually help their jobs become better and easier by having the right people in place.
It's kind of funny that we're talking about like that people and culture position, because even just it's important for an organization to understand its core value and culture. I think the last one that we don't acknowledge is financial literacy tends to be quite low in this space. And those of us who've had to be fundraising agencies have seen the trend to, oh, we're going to take this in-house and pay someone not a tiny amount of money, but then it's sort of part of overhead. Like it's just like it's not as critically compared. Whereas, and I think the same thing happens within HR. You can actually start adding more and more bodies, and it's not as critically examined. It just seems cheaper to have a full-time person inside always dealing with it.
Do you want to explain to those listening that might not be aware what fractional work is or what fractional positions are?
What it means to the individual is the opportunity to step out of working in a charity full-time and then become an independent contractor, to become a solopreneur, maybe, if you want to call yourself that, and then be able to divide your labor to multiple organizations at a much higher rate. That's like, it's just, if we kind of want to say, it's not that you're just like now like a part-time employee, is that when we kind of hear fractional, it's like it's someone who's stepped out of the system and now they're working on the system from a new paradigm. And it's very attractive to the individual because they don't have to deal with HR anymore. And that happened to me when I left and became a consultant. I hit my very low wage band where I was. I had an accounting designation, and I had found hundreds of thousands in new revenue within my first year with the organization. But then I learned that it would be many years before I'd be compensated more. And I found out that I could charge whatever I wanted as a contractor. It doesn't mean all of a sudden it was like charging like $500 an hour, but it was all of the constraints were almost punishing someone for being an employee and rewarding them full stop for being out of the system. So I think if we're going to be, what is it? Is just, it's like the ability to be an independent contractor for multiple organizations to fill up your time. But like if you want a lawyer, like, almost none of us ever in our life will ever retain a lawyer full time and be in-house. So if we think of a lot of the professional services, we're used to that being that case. But what has been strange over the last few years was that, well, what if my leader was fractional? And that leader is going, I kind of want out because this system can be punitive at times.
I think that there's some real challenges with kind of really we've seen like an exponential rise in kind of people going into fractional practice. I do think there's sometimes spaces for this kind of interim leadership, particularly even at the ED level. There can be a space for that when it's a really unstable organization, but it has to happen really strategically with an ongoing plan on what's going to be the next long-term leader. But overall, I think what ends up happening is we're watching not-for-profits get distracted by fractional leadership. And then this person who is not committed long-term and who isn't there full-time and who has their focus divided off in a number of different spaces kind of comes in, gets involved, but then they're not there for the long term. The organization actually is still stalled because they're not actually driving the mission or the vision forward. And I think it can actually cause longer term pain for the kind of shorter term gain of what they actually bring, right? And so we've talked a lot about how when we're looking to coach along and we've pitched to some organizations about fractional versus bringing us in, we actually believe the long-term gain from going into a really active, thorough search and getting the right leader in space in a timely manner who's going to then actually build that longer-term team, and they're going to watch that flourish over the years, and that is, I would say most of the time, a better option then bringing in fractional pieces on the front end, and then hoping to move to a longer term on the back end.
I think it'd be helpful if like, hey, you're our executive director. How do we make the most of your time here? Where do you want to be going? And versus thinking of it as like a romantic marriage situation of like, it would be devastating to hear that you have goals other than being here forever. And we actually went through this not too long ago, where it was upsetting to a board to hear that a would-be executive director had visions of life after. And I do think that's more of a problem than people going fractional, because people going fractional is a symptom of what's going wrong. And that HR departments are being overly bureaucratic and not trying to make the most of what they can with the talent that they do have. So it's kind of forcing out a lot of people. I do think fractional in nature is really good because it's a hub and spoke model. Like Megan and I have been in an agency where it was more valuable the more clients we had. And when it only has a couple clients, it actually is not providing any value. But yeah, separating the two, I think, is really important. We mentioned that we might talk about LinkedIn or like social networking in general. One of the blessings that I think in the sector for charities is how much of a community the charitable sector is. And because of the nature of how we are as communicators, it's an unbelievable space. And I've been able to have the fortune of knowing people for 15 odd years. Majority of our touch points are on LinkedIn instead of Facebook or Instagram or that sort of thing. And I think if people have any misread of it, they don't think of it as a networking site. The worst thing we see is InMail, where someone slams their way in and then they go straight to the offer. We have such an opportunity to come alongside people, listen to their conversations, comment on them, make our way into one another's lives, because there's the other fallacy is that there's so much turnover in this space. I've noticed a lot of people are with me in this industry 15 years later.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like, it used to definitely be more of, the resume building platform, the job finding platform, but it has definitely turned into more of a thought leadership space. But I think that's the gripe that I have with it, right? Is now everyone feels like they need to be a thought leader and putting out these really profound, aha moments, and it can feel really pretentious. I understand the value of LinkedIn. I advise people on how to use LinkedIn far better than I do. I think there's tremendous value there, but it feels like that's kind of what you have to do in that space to succeed. So I've been a big proponent, I think, of just authenticity. Troy, I know you too have had some hard adjustments to LinkedIn. What are your thoughts?
Well, I don't know if it's much a hard adjustment as it is dipping my toe into the space later in life. I am literally working my way from zero to becoming a LinkedIn hero. To take some of the pressure off, that you have to somehow have some like amazing universe-changing aha moment that you can then pontificate about in a way that's going to just change the masses' lives, and instead really see it as a place where people who are interested in very similar things that you are interacting together, and you get a chance to actually get to know them and to comment and to encourage and to be part of the conversation together. And taking that approach really does help you make larger connections. And as I started to focus much more on connect and comment over create, I was shocked by how many people were like, "Oh, it's so nice to meet you. Love to meet somebody else. Love to meet someone new in the space. Let's set up a conversation." I'm like, "Oh my gosh, it works." Whereas I got to say, as a Gen Xer on the outside for a long time, I was just like, oh my word, everyone's just here airing their comments or their thoughts. They don't care to meet people. But I'm discovering that just the opposite is true, that people really are looking for connection with people who are either like-minded or who are in kind of a similar space, or maybe who are doing something new. And there is this real openness, not just to learn from each other, but also, like, what I love is to hear people's stories. People want to share, and people's stories are far more complex and nuanced than what they can put in a post. And so for me, the opportunity to actually have a conversation with someone out of connecting with them on LinkedIn just opens up a whole world. So to me, it's that whole like connect, comment, create has been huge, and you will slowly see me in more and more people's files as we go here. So
people, when we talk about kind of connect and comment, it's just the stuff we don't realize is like you can send someone a DM. And so there was one person that was the director of purpose at the portfolio companies that own Pacific FC and here in Victoria and Vancouver's soccer team. And I just kind of reached out because I was like, that's a really cool title. What does a director of purpose do? And she was like, "Oh, thank you," and like, "Yeah, this is what it does." And it led to, she was like, "Hey, would you like to meet the managing director for Pacific FC, who happened to have started um, the whole thing in Canada for like the Canadian Premier League, and was for some time Toronto's GM, along with like maybe not Bristol, but maybe." And so it was like I had this like conversation with him in real life because I reached out to someone over LinkedIn because it was like I just formed a genuine connection. And I wasn't like, here's publicly, here's who I'd like to meet. And it wasn't anything about my needs. It was just a fantastic conversation. And then comment wise, a lot of people in the charitable world will know Mallory Erickson. She's got a great podcast, What the Fundraising, very much a public figure. And so if you don't feel comfortable DMing people, if you don't feel comfortable kind of making posts, and what I've learned about running business before I started it is like just contributing to people's comments. You don't, the patience point, just to close it out, was several months later, years later, it could be like, oh yeah, I do remember you from that. And that you're someone who's more of a plus one, or you have the assist instead of being the one who's taking the shot with a dynamic quote kind of thing.
I was wondering how Ben would bring it back to sports. Very on brand.
There we go.
I know we're coming up to time here for you, Ben. Did you have anything that you wanted? I mean, like final thoughts for sure, but anything you want to shamelessly plug while you have this platform for your own company?
Well, some of my favorite people to coach through Baker Street have been executive directors. And we mentioned it before with boards. They have a very unique mandate to have to manage and lead up. And so a lot of leaders learn the skills of managing a team and growing a team. But every one of the charitable executive directors also has to manage and curate their board, whether they realize it in the moment or not. It is their responsibility. And my sports reference is a lot of executive directors, it's like they are GMs of a sports team. And you have this ownership group above you with varying degrees of time investment and passion. Some who you never see, others who are like, "Hey, I was thinking, do you mind if I share very particular ideas on how to do your job?" And I just kind of want to say how much I appreciate the difficulty of being the number one at a charity. It's way harder than being the number one at a small business or that self-employment. And there's actually a lot more in common between the two of them than they realize, because I appreciate about executive directors that they don't view it as theirs. Troy and I in entrepreneurship is like, Vocare Union is a business that we are growing, is not ours. Ideally, it outlives us and it has its own purpose separate to like my fulfillment as a person. Many of these executive directors have their head on straight, and they know that, and they have that sense of duty. And they're just like the best people to coach. What they need to learn is systems and processes and thinking beyond 1 year, if not the next 90 days. And that's kind of like, that tends to be a strength of businesses. But yeah,
So hire Ben for coaching is the plug.
100%.
Baker Street.
He's here to help.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I wanna be respectful of your time, Ben. Thanks so much for jumping on.
Yeah.
We didn't really give you a lot of heads up time here to work with, so you came on articulate and well spoken as always, and made us look good. So thanks for that. For everyone listening in, if you wanna ask any questions of Troy or Ben or myself, you can reach out via troy@vocareunion.com or on LinkedIn. Very topical. Until next time.